Hello, everyone, and thank you for checking out my YouTube channel, The Study of Antiquity and the Middle Ages. I'm your host, Nick Barksdale, and today I'm joined by a very special guest who's going to be doing a series on the life of Napoleon. This episode is actually going to take us back to ancient and medieval Corsica to provide a outlook on a very important aspect of Napoleon's life that will shape much of the way he sees the world of his day. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Baxter Francis. Baxter, tell us a little bit about yourself, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a junior in university with the dual degree in modern history and ancient history. Been history buff my whole life. My concentrations are in ancient, it's Greek and Roman, and in modern, it's the Third Reich and Napoleonic. So the first thing we're going to talk about is obviously where Napoleon comes from, because you can't have anything until you know someone's origins, you know what makes them tick. And in this case, it's Corsica. So Corsica is an island in the Mediterranean. It's west of Elba, it's south of Genoa, it's north of Sardinia. It's a few hundred leagues out from Spain, but it's a very important island in history. And it starts off, the Greeks tried to colonize it very early on. They create a city there called Illyria, and the city is eventually taken over by the Etruscans because the Greeks abandoned Illyria because their Marsilia is far more economically viable than island. So the Etruscans take over, and then the Etruscans are outplaced by the Carthaginians. And Carthaginian rule on Corsica is very severe. So they don't really like anything that is non-African. So one of the first things they do is they implement a scorched earth policy on Corsica. So they destroy all the olives, all the wine, everything, so that the Corsicans have to depend entirely on African products. So it's similar to Hitler's scorched earth policy of Germany, towards the end there, which I kind of think is because I don't believe Spear at all, but
You do at this point, especially knowing now that he was a little bit more involved in the Holocaust than we thought originally.
Oh yeah.
Especially because he always portrays himself like, I was just a man caught in my time,
Exactly.
I was just trying to survive like everybody else. Ignore my Jewish slaves. Like, really? It's oh my god. I'm not even get started on Spear.
Your son.
He truly does. He truly does.
So eventually, though, the Corsicans seem to adjust to Carthaginian rule because they assist Hanno during the Punic War. And then when Hanno is displaced, that's when the trouble starts. So then Rome tries to exercise its power onto Corsica. They send a guy named Claudius to the island. The Corsicans completely humiliate Claudius. They force him to draft a treaty with Corsica, and they send him back to Rome. Rome's like, hell no, we're not negotiating with some stupid island. You can go back and tell them that yourself. So he gets back to Corsica and he's like, hey, I'm sorry, guys, but it's not going to happen. The Corsicans are like, you know what, whatever, just go back to Rome. And then Rome kills him. So bad end for Claudius. During Marius and Sulla's occupation of Rome, the island is divided. So both of them contribute to Corsica. So Illyria is eventually destroyed by the Romans, and Marius reestablishes Illyria, recreates it, and then Sulla creates a place called Mariana on the island. So it's kind of a give or take. They both contribute to Corsica. Now, when we get past Marius and Sulla, and after the death of Nero, the Corsicans are going to ally with Otho. And the governor of the island is going to ally with Vitellius because he doesn't want Otho encroaching on his territory. And so the Corsicans cut off the governor's head and send it to Otho as a gift. But, he's a little too busy to respond. And one of the most famous passages talks about Corsican history is from Seneca. And Seneca says that there's 4 things that the Corsicans hold dear. The first is revenge. The second is plunder. The third is lies. And the fourth is denying the gods. So they're a great bunch of people, as you can tell.
I'm sure he held them in very high esteem.
Oh, yeah. But you got to remember, he's imprisoned on Corsica. So it's kind of like John and Patmos. He hates the whole thing. So
understandable.
So eventually the the island is going to come under the control of Ravenna and the Eastern Empire. It's going to be invaded by the Saracens and the Goths and the Muslims and the Barbary pirates. And then they're eventually going to come under Carolingian rule. The Carolingians are going to sell the island to the Papal States. We'll give it to them as a gift. And then the Papal States are going to sell it eventually to Genoa in the 14th century. And that's really where our trouble begins, is with Genoa, because it's going to own the island until the Treaty of Versailles in 1768. So, what is Corsica? Corsica is a very pretty island. It's a very nice island. Aesthetically speaking, beautiful. Huge mountains, forests, rivers, valleys. It's gorgeous. Really good place to live. Economically, it's very backward. It's very feral. It's brutal. It's intense. There's no currency on Corsica. There's very little circulation. The only towns that matter on Corsica are the port cities, namely Ajaccio and Bastia in the north. And there's very little money there either. Everything is based on a bartering system. So you might trade some oil for some wine or some pork for the use of your granary for a little bit. I mean, that's how Corsicans, that's how they interact. And the vendetta, which if you're familiar with Italian politics, the vendetta is extremely active in Corsica. Piss someone off, you're going to get your head chopped off. I mean, that's just, that's how it works. And it's so violent and so uncontrollable and so idiosyncratic that when the Genoese take over the island in the 14th century, they completely remain in the port cities, and they never venture off into the island. They never even map out the island. The French are the first people to even map out the interior of the island. Now, originally, Corsica is a coastal island. All of the commerce and the population is located in the coastal cities. But as the Saracens and the Barbary pirates start to invade, that population is going to move inland. They're going to become much more dependent on natural resources and their own island than they are with foreign trade. Now, that's obviously, we talked about Carthage and how Carthage made them completely dependent on African goods. Now, that's going to go away completely, and they're going to become a very independent people, and they're going to reject foreign rule almost entirely forever. So let's talk about the Bonapartes, because this gets a little crazy. Because we have people saying that the Bonaparte line come from everywhere. We have Bourrienne, who writes his most esteemed biography. One of his childhood friends says that he has a long lineage of Tuscan nobles. They're patricians of Rome. He believes this wholeheartedly. Now we have Napoleon's memoirs, written by the Somerset de Char, which is almost completely forgotten about for some strange reason. Napoleon himself says that his family is a very esteemed, very noble, literate family that comes from the regions of Florence, Sarzana, Pisa, those places, San Marietto. And interestingly enough, he names a man named Gabriel Bonaparte. There's going to be a later Gabriel Bonaparte. But this Gabriel Bonaparte is apparently some sort of Allegorian writer who writes a comedy called The Widow. And Napoleon says it's extremely popular. We have no idea what this book is. It doesn't exist anymore. Even though he claims that all of his family's writings are, treasurized and all of this, it doesn't exist. We have no idea what it is. It's sort of like Louis XIV's translations of Caesar's Wars. We don't have it anymore, if it even existed. And then he writes about a man named Niccolo Bonaparte. Now, Niccolo Bonaparte is the personal historian of the Constable de Bourbon. And if you're familiar with a bit of your medieval history, which I'm sure everyone here is, the Constable de Bourbon was under Francis I, Valois, and he teams up with Charles V and Henry VIII and sacks Rome, and he's killed in Rome. But Niccolo Bonaparte writes a history of the sack of Rome by the Constable de Bourbon, and it becomes a very popular book. People are writing about it. Another thing that's interesting is the name itself. So there's a lot of debate among Napoleonic purists. Is it Bonaparte? Is it Bonaparte? Napoleon himself says it doesn't matter. There are some people that will be in the same family that will spell it B-U-O-N, and then some will spell it B-O-N. So it's really just a matter of preference. It doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't matter how you say it as long as you say it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Just don't put the DE in it yet. Don't put that noble participle there. But Napoleon is very insistent of maintaining this Italian connection, maintaining this Italian relation. Now, why is that? Is that because of the neoclassical resurgence that's happening in the 19th century when he's writing? Maybe. Is it because of his boyhood fantasies of reading Plutarch and all of these great Romans? That may be it as well. We really don't know. Or he may just believe that that's his history, which Carlo, which we'll talk about his father, was able to prove. But how much of this is manufactured, how much of it is true, we really don't know. What we do know is later on down the line, in the 15th or 16th century, a man named Gabriel Bonaparte, not the same Gabriel that writes The Widow, but another, comes to Ajaccio and establishes a home in Corsica. And at this point, when Genoa takes over Corsica, it's mostly populated by impoverished nobles, people that have no other place to go. And Genoa really only wants Corsica because of its strategic position with Sardinia, to maintain that control of the Mediterranean, of the Tyrrhenian right there, just to maintain that control of trade and to stick it to France, basically.
Of course.
Who doesn't want to stick it to France?
That is true.
So Gabriel comes along. He has a son named Geronimo, and Geronimo is actually going to be of some esteem because he's going to be chosen as a Genoese deputy to go to the Republic of Genoa and represent Corsica. Now down the line, we get Sebastiano, and Sebastiano is going to marry a woman from the uphill region of Boccagogno, which is not as esteemed as the port cities. So if you're from a port city in Corsica and you want to marry someone from a port city, those are where the best dowries are, the best relationships. If you marry someone uphill in the interior of the island, they're not esteemed. You're looked down upon. And in Corsican society, marriage is more like a contractual arrangement than it is something of a marital union. Very rarely do the Corsicans even get married in a church. Most of it is just dependent on the contract, dependent on the dowry, what you're going to get. Are you going to get a house? Are you going to get cattle? Are you going to get land? That's really all that matters. So we have Sebastiano. Sebastiano is going to have one daughter, Paolo Maria, and he's going to have four sons. And these four sons are Napoleon. We have Luciano, Sebastiano, another Sebastiano, and then Giuseppe Maria. Giuseppe Maria is going to have a son named Carlo Maria. And of course, Carlo Maria is going to be Napoleon's father. Now, this gets interesting because in Corsican society, if you aren't constantly trying to progress your family name, if you're not constantly struggling to maintain an appearance and keep up appearances, you're not doing well. The whole point of Corsican society is to excel your family name, excel your history. And Giuseppe, Napoleon's great-grandfather, realizes that to some extent. And so when Carlo's growing up, he's constantly going to be aware of this. He's constantly going to be trying to excel his position in society. He's going to be an extreme sycophant. He's going to appeal to anyone that has any kind of merit. He's going to do this for the rest of his life. And this is really going to impact Napoleon at some point. So the sons of Sebastiano, Luciano is the most intelligent of the bunch. He's going to join the priesthood, move to Ajaccio. Napoleon is going to go off and become a rebel. We'll talk about that later. And we don't really know what happened to Sebastiano. He just kind of fades off into obscurity. And Carlo, well, we'll see. So the first thing I want to talk about is the housing situation, Napoleon's housing situation. It's unclear about which house he lived in and where it came from. So the family inhabited the house since about 1683, 1682, give or take. And this house, when Gabriel comes to Corsica, he's given a house. He has the grandest mansion in all of Corsica at that time. which was 2 rooms above a shop, a kitchen, a storeroom, and a garden. That was the biggest mansion in Corsica. So it's unclear if that's the house that they lived in, or later on when Sebastiano marries this woman from Baccagnano, they're given a house, so it may be this house. And then, but we're pretty sure it's the one that Gabriel had, because later Luciano, as part of his social elevation, is going to buy out the rest of the family members from the house, and he's going to be the only one able to use it. So now let's talk about Carlo. So very little we know about Carlo. He's born in 1746, and then he's married in 1764. And that's really the extent that we know about Carlo. And he's going to marry a woman named Letitia Remolino. And Leticia is very esteemed family. Before French rule in Corsica, her family was the former governor of Corsica, of Ajaccio and Bastia, and they're the later inspector of roads and bridges. So she comes from a very esteemed family. They're Lombard nobles, and nobility is going to play a huge role in their decisions. Now, another thing that Napoleon writes in his memoirs is that the family has a close relation with the Medici of Florence, with the Orsini of Rome, and with the Lamanelli of Genoa, who's the Doge of Genoa. And is that true? We have no idea. But noble families are going to play a big part in the Napoleonic story. So let's get back to Corsica for a minute. So Corsica is, of course, a very rebellious society. And in 1729, they're going to revolt in a big way for the first time. And they're going to be almost immediately suppressed by the Genoese and the French, because the Genoese have a habit of always going to the French whenever there's any kind of problem in Corsica. So they're put down, but then in 1733, 3 men are going to come together at court, which is in the inland of the island, and they're going to establish the generals of the Corsican Republic, and they're going to declare an independent Corsica. And this is going to attract a lot of attention on the continent from Enlightenment thinkers like Rousseau and Voltaire, and people that believe in the concept of the savage noble, and that somehow we've been all corrupted by civilization and Christianity, and we need to return to our roots as, just people that live off the land, people that don't need any kind of philosophy, just very simple-minded, because that's where the golden age of humanity comes from, and that's what Enlightenment thinkers are teaching at the time. So, a German noble by the name of Theodor von Neuhoff, he's going to come to the island, and he's going to say, hey, I'm king. All right, everybody listen to me. This is what we're going to do. He brings a whole ship full of arms and armor and weapons, and the Corsicans are going to be like, yeah, man, you do you. So they're going to follow Theodore, and he kind of gets pretty far with the situation there. But the Genoese are going to panic almost immediately, call on France. They're going to swoop in, destroy this guy. He leaves embarrassed and completely humiliated, and dies impoverished in London in 1756. In 1755, one of the sons of the original generals of the Corsican Republic is going to return to the island, and this guy is going to be influential in Napoleon's life. His first role model, his first hero. This is someone that Napoleon is going to admire for the rest of his life, and his name is Pasquale Paoli. And now Paoli was close with Theodore von Neuhoff, of course, because his family was so close with the king of Corsica. And he's going to have had all this time while in Naples to envision this free Corsica, this independent Corsica. So when he comes back, almost immediately, he does the same thing. This is our Corsica. We're going to be independent. We're going to be free from French and Genoese rule. And he establishes a base of operations in court in the inland of the island, and begins immediately to start to excel the growth of the island. He institutes a constitution. institutions that they never had before, like a bureaucracy and a university. Now, Ajaccio has a university. It's a Jesuit college. So, of course, by the time Napoleon is born in 1769, it's not in use because the Jesuits are expelled from Corsica and France in general in 1764. So it's not in use. Everyone who is taught in Ajaccio, they don't attend the university. They're either taught by a priest in their home or by a traveling clergy. That's just how it's done. And they're usually taught in Latin because the Italian patois of Corsica is very regional. No one speaks it except in Corsica. And they want to kind of emulate their ancestors who spoke Latin, because these are all big Italian families from the mainland. So they want to know Latin. They want to emulate their forefathers. So Latin is very important. So Carlo is going to marry in 1764 to Letitia Remolino, and then almost immediately he's going to go join his uncle, who has joined Paoli in court. So he goes to court, he travels to court, and while he's in court, he goes to the university that Paoli has established. He writes a dissertation on natural rights, which leads us to believe that he's a man of some intelligence, which he obviously was. I mean, he really did excel his position in life, if you think about where he came from. So he's going to do that, and this is where things get interesting. So the Genoese are at a loss. They have no idea how to control Paoli. They have no idea how to reclaim the island, and they give up, basically. They keep all of their troops quartered in bastions in Bastia and Ajaccio, and that's where they stay. And there are some French troops quartered as well, but they're terrified to even go outside because, I mean, Paoli is pretty severe in his rule of Corsica, and anybody who does not submit to him is going to be killed in some horrendous fashion. So the island is at a loss, and they sell the island in May of 1768 to the French. The French are not afraid.
No.
They send battalions to the island immediately under the Comte de Ma. Immediately, I mean, as soon as the island is sold, and they're going to obliterate Paoli and his resistance. They're going to march into court. They're going to have a decisive battle at the Ponte Novo, and during this battle, Carlo is going to be with Paoli during the battle. He doesn't fight. They're far away. We're just watching the whole thing go down, but he's going to watch the whole thing take place. And then Letitia is also welcomed into Paoli's inner circle. So Carlo and Paoli, while they're in court, they get very close. They get very dependent on each other. So once the battle is done at Ponte Novo, Paoli is going to retreat in disgrace to Porto Vecchio, where 2 British frigates are going to take him to the mainland. Now, one of the reasons they think that the French were able to destroy Paoli so easily is that Paoli had this overarching sense and belief in destiny and fate. And he even told Boswell, who's going to go to the island and write a book, talking about how fantastic the island is, trying to get on that bandwagon of Enlightenment thinking. He's going to tell Boswell that he's getting kind of complacent because he knows that, 1, the British are going to come to his aid, and 2, that this is fate, this is destiny, this is supposed to happen. Now, the problem with the British coming to his aid is the French have just suffered a humiliating defeat in the 7 Years' War, with the Battle of Quiberon Bay, all of these horrible defeats. They are not going to tolerate a British possession right on their doorstep. I mean, that is just asking for disaster. So they're going to take a valued interest in Corsica. And so the Genoese are able to sell the island very easily because, in a way, France knows that if they don't do something, the British is going to obtain the island. And then they're going to be shit out of luck.
100%.
Yeah. So what happens after this is Carlo, family legend is that Paoli tells him, you need to stay here. You need to wait. I'm going to come back one day. You need to start using some espionage tactics and get into the inner circles of the French nobility. But really what's probably likely, and Napoleon writes this in his memoirs, is that he had a beautiful wife and a family to think after. Because while he's in court, in January of 1768, Letitia is going to have her first son. and this is Joseph. So Napoleon's brother. They've become very close for his entire life. Now, Letitia does have two other children before Joseph, but one dies stillborn, so we have no idea if it was a boy or girl. And then a girl dies as an infant. So Joseph is the first surviving son. So when court is completely demolished, they move back to Ajaccio because Luciano has set himself up as a deacon in the Ajaccio Cathedral, and so they're going to travel back to Ajaccio. And Letitia is pregnant with Napoleon at this time. He was conceived while she was with the Polian forces, and interesting enough, she almost drowns in a river on her way back to Ajaccio. The mule that she's riding, falls over in the river and almost kills her and Napoleon. So history could be very, very different.
Very different. Man, that's
so when they get back to Ajaccio, Carlo immediately is like, what am I going to do to elevate my position? Like, how do I do this? Like, what is going to happen to me? And what he decides on is he's going to go to the university. He's going to travel to the University of Pisa. He's already been to the university at court, but that's not worth much. He needs a law degree. So he's going to travel to Pisa, where a law degree is cheaper by the dozen. I mean, everyone in the whole city has a law degree. We literally have writers saying, like, you have no idea how easily a law degree is given here. He's going to travel to Pisa. He's going to get a law degree. He's also, while he's there, he's going to get proof from the Archbishop of Tuscany, of Tuscan nobility, so that when he goes back to the island, he can use that to his advantage. Now, back in Ajaccio on August 15th, 1769, it's a Tuesday, Letitia, while she's in Mass, she's going to feel labor pains. She's going to run home, and Napoleon's going to be born on a heap of tapestry in the living room. And that is how Napoleon enters into the world. And almost immediately as Carlo comes back from Pisa, he's there for the birth of his son, obviously. He leaves afterwards. He's going to try and become a lawyer. He's going to attain a very minor position in the Ajaccio court system as an assessor. He's also going to become the superintendent of the forestry schools. And there is no shortage of litigation in Corsica. Every single thing you can imagine is litigated against in Corsica. Like we said, the housing situation is insane. So just to explain that a little further, you can have one house, not even anything large or grandiose, just a regular house, but you might have 6 or 7 family members living in that same house, not in a room even, but like a corner. So let's say you're in that house one day and your cousin decides to step into your corner, you're going to sue your cousin. There's even a record of Carlo going to court against somebody for a handkerchief, like representing somebody over a handkerchief that was stolen or taken. Or it's ridiculous, the extent that they go to. But while he's not in any need of work, representing people over handkerchiefs is not commensurate with what he feels he should be worth. So he's going to start sucking up to French nobility. He's already had dinner with the Comte de Ma 2 months after the Ponte Novo battle, and now he's going to try and suck up to the governor of the southwest of the island, a man named Narbonne. Narbonne isn't having it. Doesn't like this guy at all. And Carlo's young, okay? In 1768, when he's in court, he's only 20 years old. I mean, this isn't an older guy. This is a young man who's making a name for himself. I mean, I'm 23. He's younger than me. So that's insane to think of this guy trying to elevate all these social ladders, almost a completely uneducated guy. It's really profound what kind of a man Carlo was, and you can see that in Napoleon throughout his life, that his father has really impacted him. So Narbonne pushes him off to his superior in Bastia, which is the main capital of Corsica, and it's a man named Charles Louis the Comte de Ma. And the Comte de Ma is the second French governor of the island. The first is a guy named Buonafugio. who was instituted during Paoli's reign, and Paoli immediately rejects this. So, well, he rejects it, and Buonafufio is sympathetic to Paoli, so it's just a lose-lose either way for France. So they take him off the island and they put in Marbouf. Marbouf and Carlo are going to immediately get along because he needs somebody in Ajaccio, a noble family in Ajaccio. So I should go back. The Corsican society, because it's so egalitarian, because it's so utilitarian, it's not conducive to French rule, because French rule is very bureaucratic. There are chutes and ladders to everything in society, and it's not appropriating into Corsican society. So what they have to do is they have to create a level of the community that's going to be sympathetic to France. So how do they do this? They create nobles. They create recognized French nobility on the island. But Corsican nobility is very confusing because it means something on the island, but in France, it really means nothing. Okay? All you have to do is constitute 200 years of nobility, and that's it. Now, on the continent, you got to have records to the 13th, 14th century to be a noble, to be part of the second estate. So the Bonaparte family is made one of the noble families of Ajaccio, and you have Carlo. He's so proud. He writes to Letitia's grandfather, "Oh, all of Ajaccio is so jealous of me. Look what I've done." And Letitia also, we don't know how much of her persona is kind of exaggerated. Napoleon says she was the most remarkable woman, that she's not a spendthrift, that she's so pious, she never goes out except to go to church. But then you have immediately after Paoli is defeated, she's writing to her grandfather and she is like, I need linen, I need wool, I need clothes fit for a noblewoman. I can't just be wearing rags anymore. I'm going to be a French nobility. And this is before they even sit down with the Comte de Ma. I mean, she's just assuming that she's going to have this huge upheaval in importance. So Carlo, though, is going to milk the hell out of this noble title. He's going to dress in the finest clothes. He's going to become a dandy, basically. Everyone's going to think he's silly as hell because he just walks around with his buckled shoes and his flowery shirts and everything. I mean, he just looks ridiculous. So let's talk about Ajaccio for a minute. So Ajaccio is in the southwest of the island. It's towards the end of the island, and it's a small town. It's got a citadel promontory off the bay, and it's got a cathedral, but the roof falls in. The cathedral's roof falls in 1771, and there are catacombs beneath the cathedral. So when the roof falls in, it penetrates the ground, and the smell of the dead is so bad that they can't utilize the cathedral, so they just hold church outside the cathedral. Which, if you can, I don't know if you've ever smelled, rigor mortis, but it's terrible. But it's also got, like we talked about, it's got the Jesuit university, it's got a convent, it's got a hospital, it's got a military hospital, it's got shops, mostly that sell seafood and pork and food, and it's going to stink. It's going to stink terribly. I mean, we have Balzac, who comes to the island almost half a century later, and he's going to say, this is the most indolent place I have ever been to. This is horrible. It smells. The people are stupid. Men just walk around smoking their pipes with no cares in the world. I mean, they're just a disgrace to humanity. And that's basically what Ajaccio is. It does have a nice governor's mansion, and it has a nice little stretch of land in the middle of the city called the Olmo that has this huge tree that grows there, and that's where everyone walks around in the afternoon and shows off their fancy clothes. So Carlo, he's there all the time. He's just, while everyone's working, he's just prancing around in his outfits. But Carlo is going to get very close with the Comte de Ma, because they see a reciprocal relationship here. You can help me maintain my position in Ajaccio, because it's in some way Narbonne and Marbouf are going to be butting heads for
Mhm.
control. So if Marbouf can contain his control in Ajaccio, that's going to be instrumental. So Carlo can really help him out because the Bonapartes, they are an influential family in the island, and now they're de Bonaparte, so they're
Mhm.
very important. And he's going to feel so close to Marbouf, he's going to say, "Hey, you want to be the godchild to my son Napoleon?" Like as soon as they meet, he's going to ask this, and Marbouf is going to accept. Um, Now, Napoleon isn't baptized until next July, so the July after the year following his birth. And Marbouf is not going to be able to make it. He's going to send a proxy in his place to the church, and he is going to come though for the Feast of the Assumption and Napoleon's second birthday. And while he's there, he meets Letitia, and he is absolutely enamored with Letitia. This is a beautiful woman who is she's kind of cut from the same cloth as him because her father was a governor of Corsica. So they kind of can relate to each other. Now, she's a completely uneducated woman, though, because I mean, women obviously um, during this period of history are not educated. They're not. They don't go to school, right? They're basically breeding babies is their only duty.
Yeah.
Um, so there is kind of a bit of scandal there that this older man, he's almost 60, and this woman is almost like 40 years his junior. He's taking an interest in this woman, and he's staying the first night they meet. The first night during the paella, he he's like, "Oh, well, you want to hold my hand and you want to hold my arm and let's walk the Almo together." And then afterwards, they go back to the Casa de Bonaparte, and he stays there till 1 o'clock in the morning, just talking to Letitia. So Carlo's gonna have a reputation of being a cuckold forever. He's never going to redeem himself from that. Now, Marbouf has an official mistress back in Bastia, a man named Madame Varisi, but this is an old, ugly woman. He doesn't want anything to do with people like that. So it's interesting. Now, he is going to help excel Carlo tremendously. The deputies of the Corsican state are going to hold elections for representatives that are going to go to Versailles and present in front of Louis XVI. And he's going to get that position, not because he won it, but because Marbouf is going to annul his the guy that actually won the election. He's going to annul his results so that Carlo gets the position. So already he's got a bit of an edge. Now, Marbouf has a nephew in France, and he is the abbé of the School of Autumn. And Autumn is a seminary college on the continent. It's a very esteemed place, and he's going to try. Carlo Maria is going to try to put his son Joseph in the school at Autun because from a very early age they can tell that Joseph, Napoleon's brother, is very mild mannered. He's kind of meek. He doesn't get into much trouble, so they're thinking, okay, he's going to make a great priest. Napoleon, on the other hand, and we'll talk about his childhood for a little bit now, is completely the opposite. We have Letitia's thing that he is the most rambunctious of all her children. He fights constantly with Joseph. He's very argumentative. He's very stoic. He likes to keep to himself. He has a room on the third floor of the Casa Bonaparte where he sits and he reads all day. And he reads some serious stuff. He's reading, Rousseau at the age of 9 and saying that it turned his head. I mean, he's not reading, Dr. Seuss. He's a very
Right.
skilled child. And you have to think that some of this violence that he's listening as a child is probably due to the effective French rule on the island, because even within his childhood, the French are still going out scouring the inland of the island for rebels and radicals, and they're stringing them up along the highways. They're burning their homes. So you imagine Napoleon out in Baccagnano playing with his cousins, which he's said to have done, and he looks up, on the hill and sees 6 revolutionaries with their, crucified on the mountain. he's going to be like, oh God, um, this is a normal part of life. So he's going to be exposed to some violent behaviors as a child. And Joseph, I mean, he's exposed to the same things, but he just doesn't elicit that. Now, I do have to bring this up because it is interesting. There is a theory that Joseph and Napoleon's birthdays were switched. So what's going to happen is Joseph is one that wants to go to Autun, which has no age limit really, but Carlo wants to put Napoleon, who shows this violent kind of despotic nature, into the Chateau Le Brian military school, which is one of the military schools founded by Louis XVI. And he's not going to be able to do that unless Napoleon is under the age of 10. He's not going to be able to apply for the bursary. So why do we think this? So Joseph is born in January of 1768, and he's baptized almost immediately after, but he's baptized under the name of Joseph, and his birth name is Giuseppe. And you have to imagine Carlo's living in court. He's in the inner circle of Paoli, the king of the island, so to speak. Why in the world is he baptizing his son with the French participle? It just doesn't make sense.
Right.
And there are so many other things like the Napoleon's marriage certificates, the dates don't add up. Joseph's the marriage certificates, the dates don't add up. You have Bourrienne saying that Napoleon was born on August 9th, and that's why they felt so close, because they both had the same birthday. It's kind of weird, but it makes sense in a way that they could have had their birthdays switched. But regardless of which, Carlo's going to apply for a bursary. The French government has bursaries for people of nobility that can't afford the schooling. It's for the sons of officers and for nobility that can't afford anything. So he's going to apply, but he can't get approved because he's not recognized nobility on the continent, because he's only got records that date back 200 years from when he was trying to become an Ajaccian noble. So what he has to do is he has to go back to Pisa. There's a guy there named, I'm just going to call him Phil. It's something. Phil Bonaparte is going to link him to his ancestry, and it goes back to the 14th century. So Carlo has already been chosen to go to Versailles and present in front of the king, but you can't present in front of the king unless you are a recognized member of the Second Estate. And he cannot be a recognized member of the Second Estate without these records that show that he has nobility dating back to the 14th century. And so he's going to go back and he's going to say, all right, let's do this. So Joseph has already been accepted into Autun. As a subdeacon, he has a stipend, he has everything lined up and ready to go. So the four of them leave Ajaccio. It's going to be, the five of them. It's going to be Carlo, Letitia, Napoleon, Joseph, and then two others. A man named Giuseppe Fesch, which is Letitia's brother. So Letitia's mother remarries shortly after her father dies, and her father dies very early on, like when she's a baby. She's going to marry a Swiss naval officer they have a son who's Giuseppe. So he's very close in proximity of age of Napoleon and Joseph. And one other guy named the Abbe of Varese, and he's going to go to school at Aix, Aix-en-Provence, and that's on the way to Autun. So they all go to Bastia in a carriage. When they get to the town, they all go off. Carlo, Joseph, Napoleon, and the other guys, they go off on a boat to the continent, and Letitia moves in with Marbouf.
Of course.
While they're gone. So they get to the continent, they drop off Abbe Varese at Aix, and then they go on to Autun, where he leaves Joseph and Napoleon. Now, Napoleon has to go to Autun because one of the requirements for him getting in Brienne is he has to know French. He has to know how to speak French, he has to know how to write French, and he has no idea how to do it. So he's going to learn very quickly. He's only at Autun for 3 months and 20 days. I mean, it's quick. And you have the Abbe Chardon who runs the school, and he talks about Napoleon. He's like, this is a great student. I mean, he anytime he does something wrong, instead of being argumentative about it, he just looks at the guy and he goes, "Sir, I know it." So Napoleon's a very severe child. And so Carlo's going to leave them there at Autun. He's going to go to Versailles. He's going to present in front of the king because he's got this record of nobility now. And then while he's there, the Minister of War, Montbari, he's going to say, "Hey, guess what? Napoleon's been accepted into Brienne." Now, unfortunately, Carlo can't get to Autun to take him to Brienne himself. So there's another, he has a friend there who has a son that's also going to be going to Brienne. So Napoleon just goes with them to Brienne. Now, while they're in Autun, we have some pretty interesting stories about Napoleon. One of them involves an activity that they do at the school where they have a Carthaginian flag and a Roman flag. And Napoleon is assigned to sit under the Carthaginian flag, but under no circumstances will he do so, because he has such a love of ancient history and such a love of power and victory that he only wants to sit under the Roman flag. And eventually the teachers have to discipline him because he will not sit under the Carthaginian flag. So the two of them have a very hard goodbye at Autun, and they go off to the Chateau Le Brienne. Now, the Chateau Le Brienne is a very interesting school. So Autun is run by the Oratorian order of monks. It is a religious seminary. That's what it's there for. Now, Brienne, while it's taught by lay people, it is not a seminary. It is a military school, but it is not supposed to teach them military practices, strategy, or anything like that. That comes later on. This school it's from the Order of Minims that's started by St. Francis of Calabria. And the whole purpose of this Order of Minims is to have, it's dedicated to austerity and humility, because one of the reasons that France thinks that they lost the 7 Years' War is because of this frivolity of the officer class. That they weren't involved, they were too dependent on their servants, they have no idea how to do anything on their own. So Brienne is there. It's very Spartan atmosphere too. I mean, the boys are locked in a cell at night with a straw mattress and their thoughts. I mean, it's very severe school, and Napoleon appreciates this in some respect because he's grown up reading about Plutarch, and now at the school, they're going to be reading Plutarch, they're going to be reading Quintilian, they're going to be reading Sallust, and they're going to be reading Seneca and Livy and all of these great authors. So he's going to have an even more love for this, Spartan-like military behavior. He's probably read about Lycurgus if he's reading Plutarch. So he's going to have this respect for this very austere military outlook. Now, there are a couple stories about him while he's at the chateau. And, well, first of all, the chateau is a small school. So Autun is a small school also, but the chateau is a very small school. They only have 110 students, 50 of which of them are nobles, like Napoleon, who are there. And it's run by the Chateau Le Brienne is run by the Lamini de Brienne family, which are friends of Marbouf. And Marbouf actually recommended Napoleon to this family. So on Sundays, while all the other kids are at the school and they're learning and they're reading and they're in their cells, Napoleon's going to be going off to the chateau, which kind of fuels rumors that he is Marbouf's love child. I mean, it is a widely believed myth that Napoleon is Marbouf's son, his bastard, and that's going to follow him for forever. Is it true? Probably not. And if Napoleon had even an inkling of that his father was a cuckold and he was a bastard, I mean, he would not have treated Marbouf's sons and daughters with such respect later on. Like, give you a story, when Marbouf's daughter is attacked by robbers, he gives her an insane amount of money and puts her up in luxury. I mean, he would not have done that if he had any kind of belief that Marbouf would have, underhanded his father like that.
Right.
Because while Napoleon doesn't, it's also widely, it's a huge belief also that Napoleon never respected his father, that he has this kind of hatred for Carlo because he turned against Paoli and joined the French, and he was a traitor to his island. This is not true, obviously. He names his first son Charles. Why would he do that if he hated his father? I mean, it doesn't add up. He could have used, and if you want to talk about politics, when his son's born, he could have used the Habsburg name to kind of implement his relationship with the Austrians, and he doesn't do that. So, he loved his father, and he talks about his father. He says, he's a good man, he's a kind man, but he's a spendthrift. He's frivolous. He doesn't understand things. He's silly, and he's Carlo. In the way he writes letters while he's in Brienne to Joseph Fesch, his uncle, and he talks about his family almost like he's this angry father, and then this is just a kid writing these letters, and he's talking about his brother like he's a wayward son, and his father is an indolent idiot. And it's funny the way that from a very early age Napoleon positions himself. There is a story that probably everyone in the whole universe knows about Napoleon at Brienne, and involves a snowball fight where they build forts, and then he takes turns defending one day and attacking the other day and implementing tactics. And a lot of people think that Brienne made this story up, by these 19th century writers. Is it true? I don't know. If you think about it, it could very well be true. I know a lot of people discount it because they think that it would hurt the students. But honestly, when I was in school, we had some activities that the teachers endorsed, even though we were getting hurt.
Right.
Boys will be boys. So it could be true. It's widely discredited, but in my opinion, I don't see anything wrong with the story. He has an understanding of tactics. He has an understanding of military prowess. It could very well be true.
Yeah.
Now, while he's at Brienne, there are also stories of him being this social outcast, this quiet, reserved kind of Hitler-like child. That's not true either. We have people writing that he stands up for himself. He takes up for himself. He doesn't. It's not that he's being quiet because he doesn't fit in. He doesn't want to know these people. He doesn't want to talk to these. He thinks that he's better than these kids. Because that's the way he's grown up. If you think about Carlo and the way that Carlo positions himself in society, this is the way that his life has been always. He's grown up, and especially if Carlo had these same kind of beliefs of being part of a Roman nobility, he's going to be the same way. He said of himself, "I am of the race that births emperors," talking about the Romans. So he takes up for himself. He's very austere. He loves to read. He has a library at his disposal for the first time. He loves to read so much that while at Brienne, all the students are given a plot of land. And so what Napoleon does with his plot of land is he fences it off and makes it an area where he can go and read. He loves it.
It's a man after my heart.
Yeah. he would have a field day in your room.
Right.
But things are about to go very bad for Carlo. So Joseph is at Autun, and he decides, I don't like the priesthood. I don't want to be a priest. I want to be a soldier. I want to be an artillery soldier. And he's going to write to his father and be like, "Get me in at Brienne." And Carlo's going to be like, "Oh, shit." Because he's occupied right now. There's a plot of land that was Gabriel Bonaparte's, which, if you recall, the one that first settles in Corsica. He has a plot of land in the Salines, which is an area outside of Ajaccio that was a salt marsh, and it was partly drained, turned into a cherry orchard, and over the years it's become a swamp again. And Carlo has an idea. Hey, let's make this a mulberry tree orchard, and we can supply the whole island with silk and the French with silk, and I'll be rich and wonderful. He's he's constantly trying to elevate himself. I mean, it's just insane the lengths that he goes to. So with Marbouf's backing, he gets approved to drain the swamp out and try to institute a mulberry orchard. And there's also another issue he's facing. His Geronimo, the son of Gabrielle, is also given a plot of land, and he bequeaths it to his wife's family, the Odones. And part of the arrangement is that when the sons of the Odone union die out, it's supposed to revert back to the Bonaparte family. The last of the Odone family gives it to the Jesuits, and then when the Jesuits are expelled in 1764, the land goes to the state, and now he has nothing. But he thinks that he's owed some sort of compensation for this land. So there is another plot of land that once belonged to the Jesuits that he's trying to argue for. At this same time, he's losing his relationship with Marbouf, because Marbouf has now found a pretty beautiful noblewoman in Bastia, and he's no longer attracted to Letitia. He doesn't come around anymore. So Carlo is really having a crisis. On top of that, he's spending insane amounts of money on his appearance and his home. He's installed a fireplace. He's lined his bedroom with silk. He has muslin curtains hanging in his room. And if you look at the inventory of the kitchens and the food and everything that we still have of the Bonaparte household, he's broke. He's spending everything in this sort of constant consumption to make himself keep up with the Joneses. Yeah. So another thing that he's facing is he's got a cousin that still lives in the house. He's installed a staircase into the house that he doesn't let anyone else use. Luciano this is where the housing situation gets difficult, because if you remember, Luciano bought out all the members of the original Bonaparte house, and then Letitia came in her dowry with a house in Ajaccio. So is it Luciano's house? Is it the one from the dowry? We have no idea. But anyway, he installs a staircase in there, and his cousins keep using it, and he's furious. He's going to sue them, obviously. And so he litigates against them, and in revenge, Carlo has his nicest suit out in the yard drying from the wash, and this crazy cousin is going to empty her chamber pot all over his nice suit. And so he's going to take her to court over that, obviously.
Of course.
Now, at this time, I should probably discuss Napoleon's siblings. So he has 8 surviving siblings. Joseph is the first, and then you have Napoleon. You have Lucienne, who comes afterwards. You have Elisa, his next sister. You then have Louis, followed by Caroline, Paulina, Caroline, and then the last one is Jerome. So he has 8 siblings, but he said that if his father had lived to be a little bit older, he would have had at least 20 siblings. Because Carlo does die understandably young, which we'll get to. Spoiler alert. Obviously he's going to die. Then Luciano dies in 1791. So his family does die out pretty early. But, I mean, Letitia is going to live on forever, so it doesn't matter. That's who he cares about. Now, while he's at Brienne, there are some classes he has to take. He's taking physics. He's taking history. He's taking geography. He's taking mathematics and German and Latin. He's horrible in German and Latin. Horrible. Which is strange, because it's got to be the language he was taught as a child, because he's reading Rousseau. He's reading all these things. And do you think Rousseau's translated in some niche Italian patois of Corsican? No, it's Latin. So, and he can't read French, so it's got to be Latin. So it's strange that he's having such trouble in Latin, but he is. And eventually, a man, the inspector of the military schools, is going to come around. He's going to grade everyone. He's going to tell everyone how he feels, like where they should go. And Napoleon feels like he should join the Navy because this is right after the American Revolution. The Navy is very popular. It's very sexy. Everyone wants to go into the Navy. But and Carlo is going to try and reason with Versailles to get him placed in the Navy, but as it be, he's going to obviously become an artillery officer down the line, which comes as a relief to Letitia because the first time that that Carlo goes to Paris over the Mulberry issue, she's going to stop at Brienne to visit Napoleon. It's really the last time he ever sees his father, and his father's going to embarrass the hell out of him because he shows up wearing the most ridiculous outfit in the world at this austere
Spartan school.
Yeah. Napoleon's trying to live out this dream of being like some Leonidas, and then his father's going to prance in with his curled hair and his pink clothes. He said his father was a fool. He said after that. But Letitia was scared to death he was going to drown in the Navy. She was also struck by how skinny and sickly he looked at the school. So when he gets sorted into the artillery, she's going to be very happy. And also at this time, Lucien, Napoleon's brother, he's at Autun, and he is scheduled to be moved to Brienne also. So when he does get to Brienne, and Lucien writes this years later when he's embittered and fighting with Napoleon, that when he gets to Brienne, that Napoleon doesn't show the slightest amount of affection for him. He's like, that's where you sleep. Goodbye. He doesn't care.
Don't claim my style.
Yeah, it's not a reliable source, but the inspector is going to assign Napoleon because of his mathematical aptitude, because of the recommendations of his professors, who he's friends with. He's friends with many students. He's going to assign him to the École Militaire, which is a very prestigious school that's just been reformed by Saint-Germain. And that's where we'll end for now.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our presentation for today. Episode 1 of a series on the life of Napoleon. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for watching. And Baxter, thank you so much for coming on. This is a pleasure. It's great to do this with you. For those of you that don't know, we are actually friends. And it's always a pleasure to have someone that I know, someone who also loves history as much as I do, on the channel. Baxter, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure.